That's great. That's no problem. I just wasn't aware that that was the extra person that was there. So now I've made you a participant. So now we can hear you as well. And Madam Chair, we are now all in attendance.
Okay, that's great. So I will call the meeting to order at 10:07, I believe my time is. And roll call is first. So those in attendance, Richard?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes.
And Kevin? And myself, Susan? And Michelle, are you part of the roll call as well?
Yes.
Diana is, so who does minutes?
Actually, I'll be doing the minutes at the same time, so that's no problem. Yeah, Diana is actually enjoying a few days off this week, so.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Okay. And the next item on the agenda is disclosure of pecuniary interest. And I believe I just ask if anyone has anything to disclose on that item.
No.
Nope. I have nothing.
Okay. That being said, I think we can move ahead to approval of minutes from July 14th. And that was sent out with our agenda package. Does anyone have any comments or any changes to the minutes as written?
I'm okay with them.
I'm good. No, I think they look fine to me.
The only thing I noticed, I know in the first line it said we met via video conference at 10 a.m. At the very top it says July 14th, 2020, 9 a.m. But that was not the original intent.
No, you're right. That's a typo. I will make sure that's corrected in the final version. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the only thing I saw that maybe should be updated there. And if that being said, I need somebody to approve moving these minutes from July 14, 2020.
I'll approve it moving forward.
Okay, Richard moves it, and somebody to second.
Kevin will second. Yeah.
And all in approval. I guess we need verbal approval since we can't see Martin. So those to approve, Richard?
Approve.
Martin?
Yes. Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
And myself, yes. So the minutes are approved or
Motion is carried.
Motion is carried. Thank you. I have to get caught up on some of the.
No problem.
Okay. So next item, item D, is business arising from the minutes. And that was, again, given in our package, the excerpt from the Municipal Act, the role of mayor and council. And I believe that that was requested. I'm just looking at, sorry, I'm just looking back at the minutes here. Yes, there was.
Richard had asked for that information.
There was an inquiry from committee member Richard regarding information on the mandated roles and responsibilities of council members, and the CAO has supplied us with that. Are there any questions? Do we want to go through those roles, or Michelle? Sorry, Richard.
Covers it quite fine for myself.
Yeah, I've kind of read through them as well, and it's fairly clear as to what the roles are there. It's fine. I'm fine with that. Kevin's fine.
Okay. Do we need any further action on that, Michelle?
No, it's just was information for your benefit. That's all. And you just any need to move it or approve it or anything like that. It was just there as a information.
Okay. A couple other things I noted just from the minutes is that the code of conduct, and I believe that that has been sent to all members, and if it hasn't been signed and sent back, then that's something that all members need to do. There was something else that was, oh, and regarding an inquiry from Martin regarding time commitment from council members, that Michelle has also done that, and we will discuss that, I believe, perhaps a little further in the agenda.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there's anything else for business arising, any other action items from the minutes that needed to be addressed. Does anyone have anything else to cover from there?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the compensation review reports from other municipalities. CAO has provided us with review reports from the town of Blue Mountains, the municipality of Brockton, and the municipality of Port Hope. So perhaps you can jump in and make some comments on that, or if you wish, Michelle.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I can add a little bit. I also reached out to 4 other municipalities that have also established compensation review committees. Several of them have just established them within the last year or so, but unfortunately, as a result of COVID, several of them have been just put on hold. So we're not alone in the sense that we were delayed a little bit. There are several others as well, so that their final reports, while they were anticipating them by now, they're not completed. So there were a couple of others that were probably more similar sized and than what we are, but we're not going to be able to have the benefit of that information for quite some time. So these are the 3. There are a number of other public committees that have been struck by councils as well, but most of them are for much larger centers. So City of London, for example, Ottawa, Kingston, a number of larger cities have these types of committees as well. But again, I didn't bother to include that information because a lot of their compensation, they're considered to be full-time counselors, so they actually have significantly different compensation packages. And in my review, these were the 3 that were probably closest in size or in regard to size, as well as the types of issues that we're likely to be dealing with. So I don't really have a lot of narrative for you in the sense of what each of them contains. I'm assuming that all of you have had a chance to take a look at them. They're similar but different. But it does give you, I think, a good idea of the types of compensation packages that some municipalities are looking at, some of the issues that other committees such as yourself have taken into consideration when they've made their final reports to their respective councils. My plan was not to go in detail, but simply to try to answer some questions, or if there were parts in those reports that you weren't certain would apply to us or how it might apply to Malahide, then I would maybe try to elaborate a little bit more at that point. So I guess I turn it back to you, Madam Chair, for some further direction from the committee in terms of how you'd like to respond, whether you just want to ask some questions, whether you're comfortable with the information as presented.
Right, and we can, and certainly if there's any questions from any of the members now, I will say for myself that there's quite a bit of information to digest, and I think it will, like I had gone over it, but I may need to go over it a bit more closely, and they were quite different too, even just in length, obviously. The Port Hope was fairly concise, and of course Blue Mountains, that was very, very extensive and had a lot of background information and so forth. So it was interesting to see them. I wasn't sure, how that will influence the kind of report that we do. I think, again, I'm speaking for myself. It's something that I would probably refer back to as we go through this process. Does anyone have any questions on those reports from those other municipalities?
I have one question I'd like to ask. What was the reason that the government took away the tax deduction for it? What was the main reason? It was the federal government, I know, that did that. What was, I think this, in my opinion, I think that's what I think a lot of council right now is, they're upset about, at least to the meetings that I've gone to when this is brought up. Why was it taken away, the tax write-off?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I wish I had an answer for that. I don't know why it was, only that the federal government determined that that was what they were going to do. There wasn't a lot of information provided at the time. And I honestly, I can't comment as to what their specific thinking was or why they decided to propose it. I do know that most municipalities were very unhappy with the decision made. There was a lot of comments made in response when before the final decision was made, but when it was in consultation stages. But for whatever reason, the federal government determined that that was how they were going to proceed. So,
So they were just passing something over to the municipalities. That's pretty well then, correct?
it was a decision entirely of the federal government made through Revenue Canada, essentially. And while the municipalities had a short window to provide comment and feedback, as any piece of legislation, there's always a comment period. The government decided to proceed with it anyways.
Yeah, I'm noticing like someone like Blue Mountain, their increase that they predicted they were going to give, it averages out about between 30 and 33%, which is 1/3.
Mm-hmm.
So that just seems, for the ones that are looking for an increase, that seems like the magic number. At least a lot of these councils seem to be going for.
Yes, and you'll notice in the chart under section F of the agenda, which was circulated at the last meeting as well, there is one column that refers to what those respective councils decided to do with respect to the 1/3. So you will see there that a number of them did look to increase their base compensation such that it allowed for at least the take-home amount to be consistent. And they wouldn't see a decrease as a result of the increased taxation on the income.
Okay. Is it doable for Malahide?
Absolutely. I mean, we actually have run the calculations for council in the past as to what the amount would have to be, the increase would have to be in order to make it be revenue neutral, essentially, so that their take-home pay was the same. Council of the day chose not to take that action, but absolutely that information is available and certainly could be, and I think that's part of the reason why council decided to strike this committee as well. I don't want to speak on behalf of individual members and what their thoughts behind it, but there is a recognition that it was becoming, not only did they lose out financially as a result of the removal of the 1/3 tax-free, but also because they hadn't had an increase in several years just in terms of cost of living, they were being, it was going to be detrimental to their final compensation package, and it was time to be able to bring things forward and to be more consistent with a number of other municipalities.
Okay, thank you.
Martin,
You can see me now.
you can see me. Yes.
You can hear me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, that was on rebuild for almost 2 hours. But anyway, we're here. To follow up, when and I've been kind of looking through, when was the last raise? Let's start there. Do we know that?
I believe 2011 was,
That's going to take 10 years. Yeah.
more, I believe it's 9 years altogether, but it could be 10.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 2011, and I'd have to go back and double check. I don't have it right at my fingertips, so I apologize for that.
And I didn't see it in I was kind of looking for it in our stuff, and I didn't think it was in our stuff. So
It was all, to me, it always seemed to be an election issue. Oh, we don't want to raise, we don't need to raise, we're not doing it for this. But it seems now, as the whole idea of this committee, when the election time comes up, it's nice to have incentive for people to run. And yeah, I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, yes, people are running to say, well, it's good for the community and stuff like that. But it's also nice to be compensated for your time. And I can remember them always saying, well, we're not going to get a raise, and have that in the paper. And let's say it's good that we're actually opening up this can of worms again, because if they deserve it, if we can afford it, if it's feasible to do. So.
well,
Okay. Sure, Martin, go ahead.
there was some conversation about it in the when this committee was struck, or just before that, and when the tax portion was tightened up, and you know, there was a bunch of conversation even I think at the council level, you know, just a fixed amount, or so many dollars, or so much, and I think this needs to be reviewed. We need to figure out what is involved in being a counselor, and they need to be paid fair and equitably. And the fact that the government's taking the tax, well, then so be it. That's not totally our problem to top up necessarily. It's to come up with a good value for service and attract good people. I mean, that's my opinion, what this is about.
Well, I'm getting the gist from the reports that we got from such as like Blue Mountain, and that they are topping up.
Mhm.
Because as I say, it's getting around the 30% mark for all of them, which is the 1/3.
Mhm.
So I just find that kind of interesting. I kind of wonder if the federal government, I guess, might have expected us to do this. Yeah, and the municipalities. Hard to say, but anyway,
No.
But it's only 1/3 of it that went taxable,
I know.
right? So that's, I mean, but on $11,000, that's not that much. That's
No, it's
$1,000
not.
bucks.
It's not that. I doubt very much it's the money.
Yeah.
I don't think that's it. It was just them doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes them feel a little less, which
Yep.
is understandable.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Yeah, and that's something I think when we look at the comparison, yeah, we can certainly continue with this discussion. I'm wondering if there's any other questions from any of the committee members on those review reports from other municipalities, like other specific questions that we can direct to Michelle, perhaps can answer, as far as any clarification needed, or any follow-up to those specific reports at this time. Does anybody have anything there?
No questions, but a comment if I could. After reviewing the data that has been, I guess, put to us, one of the things that's quite obvious to me is that our counselors, current and going forward, are paid less than average. And if there's an agreement, whether it be by us or the public in general, that they want good qualified people in these roles to represent them and do the work for them, then you've got to be willing to put something forward in the form of cash or benefits or something like that to attract that kind of that talent. And like I say, based on what I've seen, we are below average, whether it be by salary or by hourly rate. So at some point in time, a decision has got to be made. Do we want those qualities in people? The other thing I did is I reached out to some industry members. I can't mention the company names because of confidentiality, but a substantial difference in very similar types of roles as our counselors. Ranges anywhere from $62,000 to $78,000 a year. But like I say, it's different as far as the skill requirements, the education requirements for those jobs as well. That's what causes some of that big difference. But when I see the roles and having been part of roles like that, I would myself, my personal feeling is that, yeah, they are not compensated fairly for what they're doing and what they're expected to do. So it's got nothing to do with names of people or anything else, because that doesn't become part of the equation. It's just, what are we as the public asking them, and what do we want them to do to service us and to represent us? And from what I've seen is that they are well underpaid. Let me say just a comment based on what I've seen.
Okay. Well, I think perhaps, yes, Martin, did you have a question?
I have a comment that I believe it was in the Blue Mountains, and in one of them, they talked about a reduction in council and making it a smaller council with a higher
I
head.
noticed that.
And
Found
you
that
know, is that,
interesting.
maybe Michelle can comment on this. You know, is this council the right size? Is it too big? Is it, where do we sit there? Are we wanting to stay with the same amount of people? Any comments there?
That is a somewhat political question, but I can give you some information. I did do a report for council, I'm going to say 2 terms ago, and we looked at the ward structure. We looked at whether or not elections should be held at large for all positions versus using the current ward structure. Did some survey and analysis based on similar size municipalities based on population in terms of their number of council members and things like that. We have a 7-member council. That number is not legislated. We do not have to have a 7-member council. There are a number of other municipalities that are similar in size or larger that have less members. There is a requirement to have an odd number. But certainly there is an ability to be able to reduce that number. There are a number of municipalities that only have 5 members. And there are a number of municipalities that is, rather than continuing with a ward structure, have determined that it would be at-large elections as well. There really is not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's what the community and is comfortable with and how they feel they'll still be best represented. That report that I presented a number of years ago to council did indicate all of those options, and the council of the day at that time determined that they were satisfied with the existing representation and that they felt very strongly that the wards should be maintained, that they felt that there was intimate knowledge of those ward councillors to be able to deal with those geographic areas specifically. There are definitely, because of the size and the layout of Malahide, there are some nuances. So the Ward 5, or sorry, Ward 4 includes Port Bruce, which tends to be a little bit different with it being a port town than some of the issues that might happen in Ward 1, which is at the northern part of the municipality. So geography does have, and the types of communities within the wards does make a little bit of a difference. But again, we're not that large, and the numbers of constituents per ward are not that significant that you couldn't potentially look at an at-large base as well. But at that time, anyways, the members of council did determine that the ward structure was what they felt was the best representation for their constituents and for the community, and decided to stay with the same number that they have. But there is no, there is an ability to be able to reduce that number if council and this committee thought that that was something that should be considered anyways.
I'd love to be in that meeting. I'd like to hear you, Michelle, say, we've decided we're giving you all a 25% raise, but 2 of you have to leave. We'll leave the floor open.
Again, I did say it was a political decision to make, and it wasn't necessarily easy. Staff provided options, not necessarily recommendations.
Yeah. That'd be fun.
But that is, not that I'm suggesting that, but that is within the mandate of this committee, if we wanted
Yes.
to look at that as well.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
An interesting point,
Yeah.
because I hadn't considered that. Yes, Richard.
One of the things that, I mean, even considering something like that, it appears to me that the ward structure, the way it's laid out, is going to stay in size as far as land area. But the other thing we have to keep in mind is that the growth in population in different areas, that, you know, you've got the people there now. If you cut back, are you going to turn around and have to add to it later on because growth? And if growth is something that, you know, say Malahide is looking at doing, you know, sometimes it's better to prepare for the future by adding something in early than to take something away from it as well. So just a comment.
Yes, and in fact, if I may, Madam Chair, that was one of the basis of the report, and that was there is a requirement for the clerk at each election to review the population within the wards and ensure that essentially where there is a ward structure, all of the wards have comparable numbers of constituents in them. And so that's a normal process before each election. And then if there is changes that need to be made because one area might have experienced significant growth versus another, and then it becomes disproportionate of the numbers of ratepayers in each of those wards or number of electors. So you need to make some adjustments and potentially redraw some lines and you know, reallocate population to where it levels everything out. So that was the premise behind it. At the time, it was also determined that everything was pretty even. They're not the same, but they're within the acceptable ratio of plus minus to be able to go forward. So that was one of the reasons as well that staff didn't make any recommendations for changes, only offered up some different discussion points on that basis. But still, as of the last election, everything is still at the acceptable level in terms of the plus minus ratio.
Well, that's interesting and interesting to think about. I've always, again, this is a personal comment, I've always thought the ward system has worked fairly well, but that's not to say that what's been done in the past has to be maintained if there is need for change. But I can see I can certainly see that as far as the different needs in different areas, because it is a municipality that has fairly diverse in some ways. So that makes sense. Any other comments on the, specifically on the review reports from other municipalities? As Michelle has mentioned, we don't have any, well, if there's any others, they're kind of in process, such as the same as ours, correct?
Yes.
Just because of things being held up. So, but that gives us a few ideas going forward, and perhaps as we can look back at those as a reference, again, giving us some ideas of how we might want to approach and look at things as we proceed. Okay.
I found that by going, reading through that one time, I didn't get it all. Like, I don't retain as well as some, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, there's a lot of information there. And if we're going to really review that and have a good discussion, then you got some homework ahead to understand it clearly.
I think so. I agree completely. I need to look at those a little bit more closely and spend a little more time. I might have more questions coming out of that in the future. So, All right. If there's no other comments on that, I was going to proceed to item F on the agenda, which is the council remuneration comparison. And that was previously sent out in the July 14 agenda. And so that is comparing various townships basically around the area with Malahide. And again, as Michelle has pointed out earlier too, the last column is the action taken regarding the loss of the 1/3 tax-free allowance. So are there any questions, concerns, comments on this comparison? And we've already kind of touched on a few things as far as, you know, some are below us, some are above us. I think it probably, and perhaps I can address a question right off the top. I'm assuming in some cases it's a matter of population in some of these. For example, the municipality of Middlesex Center has a bit, is that the one I was looking at? A bit higher rates for all of those positions of mayor, deputy mayor, and councillor. And I didn't have a chance to look. I'm assuming perhaps population is much higher than Malahide.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I would suggest to you that some of the higher ones that are there indeed have higher populations than Malahide. So Middlesex Center, definitely. While I don't know the specific population, my understanding is it's probably around 16,000. And like I said, I don't know the exact number, but it's up in that neighborhood. Strathmore, Caradoc as well has a higher population than Malahide does. Thames Center does as well. I believe they're 12 to 14,000 in that ballpark. So
what is Malahide? I should know this, but what is Malahide's population? I did know it at one time.
Yeah, just under 10,000. So about 9,600. Yeah.
I was thought it was based on per household, not, is it the population, like for the taxes, is it based on the household, not the population, correct? Because like I say, the population and the number of households is greatly varied because the houses, some have maybe, I'm just saying maybe 8 to 10 people in a house now compared to what we.
The population is what I'm referencing. How each of these members of council decide their compensation is entirely up to those councils and those municipalities. It isn't necessarily based on, my understanding is it's not based on whether or not you have 10 households or 100 households, or
Okay.
quite frankly, whether you have a population of 5,000 or 15,000. All I'm suggesting to you is that it appears at this point that the ones that have the higher base compensation also have a slightly higher population. And that may just be how it's played out, but there seems to be some trend in that regard. But it doesn't mean that your compensation needs to be entirely based on your population either. There is no right or wrong in that context. So it's what this committee and what the council itself, based on the recommendations of this committee, feel is appropriate for the job that needs to be done. But I just, the comment that Susan had made was that there appears to be a correlation, and there does appear to be a correlation between higher population and higher base wage.
Okay.
Right, and just to clarify, yeah, I wasn't suggesting that the compensation was based just on population, but I was sort of, there probably would be, with a higher population, there are more taxpayers. So that your tax base is a little bit higher. So that's sort of, but it certainly isn't based solely on that.
No, I was wondering if it was based on per household or by the population,
Yeah.
that's all. Okay,
No,
it's clear.
and neither really.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So questions and comments on the comparison that we've been given?
Yeah, and if I may, Madam Chair, the reason that I had included this again was At the last meeting, the committee acknowledged it, but really didn't go through it and just suggested that it was something that they were going to want to revisit and have some more detailed discussion, going forward. So we included in this agenda package. And it may be that, again, you would like to see it referenced in a future package too, if there doesn't happen to be, if you still need to have it as reference moving forward.
Just from a simple calculation point of view, I just took all the numbers from just the base pay. I think there's 19 different townships there, and it works out to, by my numbers, $11,740 is the average, which just based on that alone puts us $600 approximately below what Malahide is currently getting right now. That's just on an average, and it's just a number.
Sorry, I didn't catch all of that,
I didn't catch that.
Richard. It puts us a little below.
What I did is I took all the numbers, and there's 19 different ones, added them all up, divided by 19, and came up with a number of $11,740 was the average base salary. So you're a high of 21,000 and a low of 4,000. So it's a big range in there. So it's hard to get what you would call a true average. I didn't drop the high and I didn't drop the low. I could have done that as well, and it would have changed it. But it still shows that Malahide is below the average one way or another.
Right.
The other thing, if I may, Madam Chair, just point out one of the items, for example, the lowest base rate that which is the very last one here. I think it's one of the lowest ones anyways. Plimpton, Wyoming. They have a base rate for just a member of council, not mayor or deputy mayor, but council of $4,300. But in addition to that, their compensation package is they get paid per meeting on top of that. So you have to take into consideration as well, is that if for each council meeting that they attend, they get an extra $161. So if you were to look at, even adding, on a guess, I would say 2 a month, that increases the base pay substantially. So there is a base pay for sure, but they're not necessarily apples to apples, because some communities get paid in addition to that base pay based on meeting and just the way they calculate their compensation. So you will see, and again, North Huron has similar type of situation there.
Right. And there's even quite a range in the pay for meetings too.
Yes.
There's a fair range between municipalities. I noticed that. And yes, this was, I think we had talked about this before, and just to clarify, the pay for our councillors, deputy mayor, that they do not get additional pay for regular council meetings or even other committee meetings, correct?
Correct, with the exception of just a few outside boards. So
right.
Conservation authorities, there is an additional allotment, but otherwise, yeah, the primary committees that council members participate in outside of regular council meetings, there is no additional meeting paid for.
Okay.
But that is an option if this committee wanted to consider that. That's something that is in your purview as well.
And the 165 per diem rate for Malahide, that is for some conferences and so forth.
That is some correct. Yeah. Those would be for attendance at an event that would be outside of the municipality. So, and I think an example I gave is conferences for sure, but there might be a situation where a member of council gets invited to a particular meeting or workshop or something, even in the city of London, or maybe in one of our counterparts in Middlesex Center or something. There might be something going on. If they would get a per diem rate for that. So there's an expectation, the way our structure is set up currently, that members of council would attend regular council and committee meetings within the existing allotment. If there are additional activities outside of those regular council and committee meetings, then they would be eligible for a per diem.
Okay, thank you.
I think Martin had a
Sorry,
question.
Martin. I'm looking at notes. Yes, Martin.
Yes, so if we were to take Richard's formula there and use the per diem, then we're gonna be well below the half mark then, because of the there's some low ones in there that have a meeting rate. But what I did with this, because we started back at this raise rate because of the tax thing. I took our 11,150. A third of that became taxable. The other 2/3 was always taxable. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
So I took 11,150 divided by 3. That amount, I taxed it at 40%. That means that if that person had a 40% income tax rate, then $1,486 would bring them back to pre-cut wages. And I think that, to me, that's kind of where that's a jumping off point for me, where, okay, that brings me from 11,150. We'll pay them the tax on the 40 on the third, and that brings us to 12,636. That is, if we gave them a raise to 12,636, at least they would be getting pre-2019 wages. And that's a jumping off point. And then we got to look at all the other information of time and commitment and everything from there. But that's the math I did with that list. So.
Yes,
And I
maybe,
agree
Madam
with that.
Chair, those calculations have been made already. I haven't included them in your package yet, but I will for I can send that out separate, even just for your information before the next agenda. Staff have done those calculations previously and determined, what would bring you up to the pre-2019. So I can certainly send that information out. But it is very similar to what Martin has indicated. I don't have the specific number, but yes, very similar.
I think that would be useful information for us so that we can take a look at that. And if I can kind of follow up on that same vein, so in the Malahide column, it says no action taken regarding the 1/3 tax-free allowance. Adjustments were made to base salary, and I apologize if I should know this. So what were those adjustments made to the base salary? Did we talk about that, or did I?
For Malahide,
Yes.
there were no adjustments made. So that's part of the challenge is that
I see. Okay.
the council of the day decided they weren't going to increase their base compensation to essentially make it revenue neutral. And that is I think what Martin is referencing in that $1,200
Right.
will bring them back up and essentially make it revenue neutral for
Sure.
the home pay.
You know what? I read that column wrong. I thought it said no action taken, but then I thought there were adjustments made to the base salary, but there were not.
There were not.
And that's what I thought. That's why I was a little confused by that. Okay, and that's my mistake. I was just misinterpreting that. So yes, I understand, and that was my understanding, was that they chose not to, whereas a lot of other municipalities actually did make adjustments at that
Correct.
time. So
Yes.
I think that information to see what that costing would be for myself, I think it would be very helpful for the committee to see that. So.
Yep. I can make sure that that's sent out to the committee and definitely on the next agenda as well.
Okay, that'd be good. Sorry, I'm just making a couple of notes. Are there any other questions on this comparison chart that we have here? If there's no other questions there, we could move ahead to the next item on our agenda. The item G is review of council benefits. and specifically mileage, monthly allowance versus kilometer.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, I can maybe jump in there. So the council members don't receive any other employee benefits, I'll use that term, with the exception of they are reimbursed for mileage. Currently, the decision is that there's a monthly allowance, but I believe the question came up at the last meeting was whether or not consideration could be on a per kilometer basis, and that is absolutely an option. The council at the time decided that the monthly allowance was sufficient for them, but the current mileage rate that the municipality uses for its staff, which is also the same one that council members use if they're traveling outside of the municipality to a particular event. They're reimbursed for mileage that way as well. It's 45 cents per kilometer is the municipal rate at this stage. And then of course the remuneration bylaw that was circulated with the last agenda package indicated how much the monthly allowance is for members. And that is a situation where essentially that's to cover the day-to-day traveling that may be necessary within the municipality on various council or constituent business. So if they had to bring greetings to a local community event and had to drive, 10 kilometers of return trip to be able to get there, then this is intended to be able to cover that extra mileage on a regular monthly basis, or mileage to be able to attend council meetings, committee meetings, and those types of things. So this is to be travel within the municipality on council business.
Once again, just as a comment, looking at the numbers here, it appears that we're, I would say, below the mark when it comes to even mileage. And I know in industry back 10 years ago, we were substantially higher than that. And I see that there's a number of municipalities, I think that it's, say upwards of 58 cents a kilometer. So if we're going to consider by kilometer, I think we need to look at the rate too per kilometer. But then I also ask the question, if you're going to do by kilometer, somebody has to take all that information, they have to put it in, which now increases the workload from your group, I would think, Michelle. And where do you stand as far as being able to handle the additional input? Hopefully at the end of the day, we don't do something here that ends up causing you to have to hire more people as well, because then we benefited nothing. Right?
No, I think that isn't a significant issue because what would happen is the council members themselves would be responsible for tracking mileage and then for submitting that mileage claim in. Staff currently do that as well. So if I have to travel different places, I have a monthly sheet and I record, I traveled from here to here, it was this many kilometers, and then that information is submitted to our accounts payable people. They simply take the bottom amount and go from there. So I would suggest to you that that would be the same. So in terms of staff commitment to be able to process, it might be slightly more, but certainly not substantially more than the current monthly allowance. What this would do is it would put the onus back on members of council to have to track each individual council activity, which is sometimes, and the comments that we've received back on occasion is somewhat challenging, because if an individual, and I'm going to say, lives out in the rural area, decides to drive into Elmer to be able to conduct their normal grocery shopping. But once they get to the grocery store, they happen to see a constituent who wants to chat with them, and they chat for half an hour on a particular item. They come to some resolution or whatever the case may be. The person carries on with their day. They go to the bank and a couple of times, and I'm sure you can appreciate this is actually the lives of our council members. So there has been some feedback provided that it's somewhat challenging for members of council to track specific kilometers related. Was this a personal activity? Was this a council activity? Did they kind of merge? And it can be difficult that way. So this monthly allowance has been, the feedback from council members is this is easier for everyone to be able to administer and track, so that they don't have to be worried about those specific little individual items and having to record them on a regular basis. This was considered to be a reasonable mileage allowance at the time, based on, and didn't require them to have to track each individual, 30-day activities that per month that were going on.
Makes sense.
And I'm not suggesting this is the right way to handle it. So for staff, in terms of the amount of time that would be required to process this is very small. It may be substantial for some members of council when they're going about their regular business versus council business.
To track all of that individually and share.
And keep a log and be able to my own personal opinion, I would suggest to you that probably there would be a lot of mileage that would be overlooked, just because it would be somewhat challenging for members of council to be able to consistently, accurately record it.
Definitely a nuisance issue.
Yeah. And I know that from personal experience, because I'm able to claim mileage working for the county. There are many times that I may combine. If I have to go to St. Thomas for something, I can legitimately claim mileage, but I probably don't if I'm combining it with something else that's of a personal nature. So I do the same. Martin, did you have a comment?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I think if you were to go to a mileage rate recorded, you would find, you're probably going to find some that would have, there'd be a large discrepancy between the mileage reports from 7 councillors, or at least the 5 councillors for sure.
Yeah.
Some would merge it into everything, into their day, and others would be, would throw miles out for whatever. That's my experience there. One comment I have on the, so the $570 at 45 cents buys us 1,266 kilometers. That's not, that's not a lot, but it might well do. But I did think of this, that, is this truly to do council business and go to other meetings and go check out the washout or wherever they're going? Or if they're using these kilometers to go back and forth to the council meeting, which is their paycheck. I mean, who gets paid to go to their job? That's a gray area for me. I would say you get paid, we should pay them adequately at the council level to drive back and forth to the council meeting. And then the mileage would be for roaming the township and checking out and going and paying a visit to somebody and doing all that. That's personally the way I see. May not be the way it was, but that's the way I would see it should be done.
Yeah, and if I may, Madam Chair, Martin's comment just reminded me of something. I also, it was also recognized at the time that because Malahide is geographically so spread out from one end to the other, that by having a consistent mileage rate, it was felt that would compensate adequately for anyone, whether you were at the northernmost point of Malahide that you reside in, had to drive much further distance. Or, for example, if you were the Ward 2 councillor, like Councillor Moore is right now, and he's able to walk to the council meetings, as opposed to having to drive, right? So it was felt that this was probably going to mean it evened out over the course of time, as opposed to, one member having to be compensated a significant amount because they live in the more remote area, and just those types of activities. So I do recall that as part of the conversation as well when some of these mileage discussions took place too, is that the flat fee was a reasonable compromise and didn't necessarily penalize one person more other than for their specific place of residence in the community.
Okay, thank you. Any other, one other comment about mileage, and this is perhaps just for clarification, on some of the different townships on the chart, they mention current CRA rates. That is
Canada Revenue Agency.
okay. That's what I was assuming. I just wanted to double check on that.
Yeah, so Canada Revenue Agency allows a maximum mileage rate that you can claim without it having to be, and I'm not going to use the right terminology here, so I apologize. I'm not a tax accountant, but there is a cap that you're allowed to claim as an employee of any organization in terms of claiming for mileage. And so they have a recommended cap. And I think that is for taxable benefits, if I'm interpreting that or using the right terminology. And a number of municipalities just simply use that rate because that's considered to be an independent source and isn't an arbitrary figure that somebody just decided to pick. That was something that is recognized in tax law as an appropriate mileage rate under the Canada Revenue Agency.
And does it change
Yes.
Annually?
It may not be annually, but it changes regularly, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Similar to other tax laws that are updated on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on that comparison chart that we have? Questions or comments on that? That was sorry, not on the chart.
It was G.
It was G. That was the review of council benefits and mileage and so forth. Okay, and the next item on the agenda then is H, the survey of incumbent council members, hours spent per week or month for council business, and that was sent out. Sorry, I just want to grab that.
Yes, that was sent out on a separate cover on Friday. I was waiting for all of the information to come back so I could give you a complete picture. And those responses have been, I said there were 4 specific questions that were asked. All members of council responded, and they're in no particular order other than the order in which they responded. So I've simply labeled them Councillor A through, what is it? G, A through G. So you can see again, the questions may allowed for some type of interpretation on the council member's behalf. And you'll see with some of the additional narrative that went into some of the answers, there was more elaboration from some members of council than others. I can try to answer some questions if council has them, or try to interpret some of the answers better if there were some questions that the committee members have. But otherwise, they're taking the exact responses that the council members had provided.
And thank you for providing that. So comments, Martin, I don't know who was first, Martin or Richard.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, just from my review of it, like I say, it's hard to come up with something, but I came up with approximately 15 hours a week. And that's also from I did a one-on-one interview with one of the counselors as well. So, and that's the number I came up with. So somebody else may have something different, but.
And if I may, Madam Chair, I think that a couple of the council members said it really varies from week to week. And I would suggest to you that that absolutely is the case, so that a couple of the council members had responded back to me and said, this is somewhat challenging to come up with, you know, what we think it is week to week, because it may be that it's very quiet one particular week and you might only have a couple of hours, and then there might be another week where there's a number of hot issues happening. There's a number of committee meetings and council meetings that are all happening back to back, and you might be 20 or 25 hours. And truly, I think it does vary. And so coming up with an average is a little bit I would suggest to you, it probably is a little bit challenging for council members to be able to determine with any type of accuracy. And I think that comes through in some of the responses that you receive from the members of council, but it really does vary from week to week. I can, just because I know the types of issues that we're dealing with, and there are also not even just week to week, but month to month. There are some months of the year when things are much quieter than other months. It seems to be the nature of I'm sure with all of your other jobs, there are weeks and months where you kind of go, wow, this was a great week. I got cleaned up on this and this and this, and there were some outstanding items that I was able to get caught up on. Wow, this was great. And there are other ones where you to the end of your day and you go, oh my gosh, I don't think I got anything done today because I was dealing with this phone call or that situation or whatever. So it really is the same for members of council.
Then you have a pandemic, right? And it's like
yeah, to throw everything on top of that.
Carry on, yes.
So Martin, did you have some comments there?
Sure. Well, Michelle, working from home is supposed to be very efficient, so you're getting more done than ever.
Some days, yes. Some days not so much.
Yeah, that. So anyway, what I think I read here is that it's a varying amount of time, but it's also different counselors are putting more in than others and varying.
Yep.
You can almost kind of read that in the comments to some degree as well. So it's, maybe we need to ask Mr. Moore, 50 years ago, what was the time commitment versus now? Because that's sort of where that's where the formula got its start. And I'm sure he would say that, I remember he said once it was like $6 a meeting or whatever it was pretty small, but definitely the time commitment is larger, and and for those who really work at it, there's quite a bit of time invested. I'm going to say that 12 to 15 hours is going to be probably a very, very reasonable amount on a weekly basis. I can see that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You make a good point, and I kind of admitting my age here, but I've worked for the county for over 30 years. And when I started, I was at the county admin building, working for the library, but at the county admin. And I remember, like, in all the county departments, 1 or 2 people. And now I've just seen that evolution of local government, which is really interesting from my perspective of the amount of things that have been downloaded from the province, for example, and the different kinds of work that has to be done, from human resources to financial services to whatever. And I know I'm talking about the county, but at the lower tier municipalities, I'm sure it's the same thing. The work that is required, even 15, 20 years ago and further back, like, I think it was quite different. And maybe I'm sort of, I'm making some assumptions, I know that, but definitely I think the workload has really changed and only continues to grow with the amount of information that these counselors have to deal with, and the amount of issues that they're dealing with, and let's not forget the types of communication we have. Yes, you might have been getting phone calls from taxpayers ages ago, but now it's 24/7, right? Because they can reach you through social media or through emails or texts or whatever. And I think that puts an onus on counselors to kind of be, again, I'm making some guesses here, but it puts the onus on counselors to kind of be, they're available all the time.
There was a time when if you had a problem with council, you sat down, you typed out a letter, you thought about it.
Yeah, maybe.
You put some thought in it. You put it away for a day. You thought more about it. Either you put it in the trash or you decide to send it. Now you got 15 seconds and in 288 words, it's gone.
Yeah.
So there is, of course, a lot more, the hours that they're putting in now. Yeah. Well, we all are, or all our businesses have changed, and the same with council.
Any other comments or questions on that, or perhaps comments from Michelle on how we can follow up with this information, what we need to do, next steps, you know, from councillor responses?
Well, again, this was a request of the committee from the last meeting. There was some discussion at that meeting that in order to come up with an appropriate compensation amount, you needed to understand the roles of the council members, which was included earlier in the package. You also needed to understand the type or the level of time and commitment that was required. And so I think this is the base amount. The questions, as I said, they were very short, and you've got varying responses here. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that there is anything more to do other than it's just one more piece of data for you. I guess my thought or my comment to the committee is if you need more than what's here in order to do an adequate consideration, then that was what I was looking for. That would be the comment that I would have, was if you think you need more, then let me know and I can go back to the members of council and try to seek some more clarification. If you're satisfied with this is kind of giving you an idea, enough base data to be able to continue on with your deliberations, then I think that's all you really need to do at this stage. My purpose was to try to just give you some more data. I know you're being inundated with lots of information, and from this extreme to this extreme, depending on the municipality and the situation, but it really is to just give you a broad spectrum to be able to consider and to be able to think about how you would like to see the compensation package for Malahide council members.
Okay, who was first?
Go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment, I guess, when I see the information coming back from the counselors and I trying to think about the general population. I think sometimes it's underestimated the difficulty of being in the role of a counselor, a mayor, deputy mayor, or whatever. And I guess half of my career was in the technical trades. The other half was as a human resource manager and a director of human resources between Canada, US, and Mexico. So one of the things over the years that I've seen is the difficulty in the issues that you deal with every day. Some of them are just yes and no answers very quickly. But in most cases, when you're dealing with a population that's very diverse, like we have around here, those issues become more and more complicated, which means that the skill level of a counselor and the knowledge level should be going up and increasing with it. Like I say, but the degree of difficulty of their job and being able to deal with these issues, and once again, with those types of roles and the responsibilities, you've got to compare the compensation package to that. And it's not the same as it used to be 10 years ago. And as we've all noticed this year, how much it's changed and the different types of questions that I'm sure that they get every day, where they simply can't answer it, where they've got to get back and get support and help to deal with it. And we need to recognize that in a counselor's role, what they're faced with every single day and the challenges that they're faced with. Because if I'm someone and I'm a voter and I have a question for a counselor, the answer I want to hear is yes. And if I don't get my answer yes, then I'm not necessarily happy with that counselor. They didn't do their job. They didn't meet the roles and responsibilities of taking care of the constituents. And so it puts them in a difficult position. So, like I say, I think something we need to bear in mind when we deal with this issue of compensation. Martin, it's yours.
Thanks.
Okay. I guess in the last meeting there, Michelle, you made a comment that, preparation time for preparation time alone for council meeting, you know, an hour and a half or whatever to read an agenda. Like I do read some of the agendas, and I don't read them word for word, but you know, 150 pages plus, like there's a lot of information there. I even, you know, do all these counselors read the whole agenda? You know, how do we even gauge that? And that's maybe not our job totally, but I sometimes question how informed they are of everything that's placed in front of them, or how you could be. And even a person was to consider being a counselor, I wouldn't consider being a counselor unless I took the time to come informed. And are they coming informed? If they are coming informed, is 48 hours enough to read 150 pages? I realize a lot of it's duplicated because some of those are ongoing projects. But I think it's a very big task for them to be prepared. And so that agenda comes out on Tuesday for a Thursday meeting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is there any conversation about whether that's too tight a timeline or not, or is that?
If I may, Madam Chair, through you, it comes up periodically, but not frequently. I think it becomes more challenging for new members of council. I think incumbents that have been on council for a while tend to have a lot more background, so that even when you start to look at a staff report, of course, there's a number of sections to a staff report outside of the specific recommendation, and you know, includes a lot of background and some narrative. And you've mentioned, Martin, there is some of it that is somewhat repetitive. So let me use an example of a drainage report. You know, we identify the drain, we identify that there was a petition that has been submitted. Here's the recommendation. Let's appoint a drainage engineer to do the necessary report. Those things happen very frequently. I would say probably 15 or 20 a year. And the structure and format of the information is exactly the same. So that still takes up 3 or 4 pages in your agenda package, but you really don't need to read a lot of the detail in it. Once you've read 1 or 2 of them, you know that that's how it goes. But you're absolutely right. Council members are now dealing with a much wider variety of subject matter, of issues and concerns as a result of new provincial legislation, as a result of just new situations that come up in our municipality. And for those that have been around for a while, some of it becomes cyclical, and the individuals are maybe a little more able to be, they don't have to spend as much preparation time because they have some of that history and some of that background already. For new members, I would argue that it is very challenging for somebody coming in and then getting that background and that having that experience and having that history. And there are a number of members of council that I would suggest read all of the information, but maybe don't go a whole lot further in conducting their own research. And then there are other members of council that not only read the entire agenda package, but then reach out to various constituents or reach out to other members of staff, do their own research via the internet, all different. And there's a wide range, and it probably is dependent on what topic it is, what situation you might be facing. But there is a wide range, and that goes back to, I think, even where I mentioned it varies from week to week, because there will be some weeks, as you mentioned, Martin, there might be issues that we've been talking about for 3 or 4 months. So you don't need to read all the narrative in the background document. You really need to see what's happened since 2 months ago when we talked about it the last time. And that amount of time then preparation is very different and varies. And so I think that it's much easier for individuals, and my long-winded answer back to your original question, Tuesday to Thursday timeline. But I think it's easier for people who've been on council for a long time to be able to maintain that timeline. They know that Tuesday night and part of Wednesday is spent reviewing the 150 pages of the agenda. But of those 150 pages, maybe 50 of them are ones that I don't have to read in great detail. I'm going to skim the surface because I already know that that's the background. I'm going to focus on this part here. And, you know, and if we've looked at the staff report that recommends entering into a contract or an agreement, get to the bylaw section, I've already looked at that part, but the contract and the agreement is in there. It's, you know, 20 pages of legal terminology. I'm not going to read that in detail because the lawyers have already prepared it. It is what it is. I need to be comfortable with why I'm going to enter into that contract in the first place. So some of it does vary. And I think it's your comfort level with the material and your history of the topics and the subject that impact on whether you have enough time or whether you don't.
So in a nutshell, if you read one drainage report, you've read them all.
in my personal opinion. Now, if you're speaking to the drainage engineers, they're going to tell you something entirely different. But
I know.
Exactly. It depends.
That's
Again,
why they're making $100,000 a year.
it depends on
Exactly.
the interest. But and Martin, I think you have another comment there, but I was just going to say, to keep in mind, it's interesting that you mentioned the difference between counselors who have some experience and those who are coming new. And I do think in looking at compensation that it is imperative that we are able to, that people are willing to step up and do this. I admire and respect anybody who is willing to take on these roles to sit on council. I think it's a huge task, and I think that the compensation has to reflect obviously the work that goes into that, and the dedication and all of that. Martin, over to you there.
My fear, my experience of too much information and sometimes long-winded instructions is almost, you know, it gets scaled over and easy to miss stuff. I got one time here at the shop, we had a long work order with lots of information, and right in the middle of it, right, just hidden right in one of the lines I put in there, go to town and pick up 12 beers. And about 3 hours later, the guy come up with the work order in hand. He said, "What's this?" That's the test to see if you're reading the work order. Because they can scale through it and just say, this is all good stuff. But I that's the fear I have with long information that doesn't get read, you know, like what's in it.
yeah, and if I may, Madam Chair, the other thing that I think council members and this committee needs to know as well is that we do not expect members of council to be experts in every single area of responsibility of municipal government. Quite honestly, that's why you have municipal staff that have that background, have that education and experience. And while absolutely every single report and every single recommendation that comes from staff needs to be considered very closely, needs to be vetted by members of council, we don't expect them to be able to cite, you know, the 300 pages of the Municipal Act and all of the other types of pieces of legislation that go into making decisions. But at the same time, when a staff report comes back and says section 203 of the Municipal Act references this, and this is the framework and the reason why there's a suggestion or recommendation to take action on something, you know, they can focus in on that more narrow scope and make those educated decisions. As I said, I'm not a drainage engineer. I am not a tax specialist. Fortunately, we have qualified staff in the treasurer that is a tax specialist, and we have a professional engineer on staff that knows all those ins and outs of the Drainage Act. So we rely on those individuals and their expertise, and council members need to as well. I certainly don't want to suggest that to this committee or to any members of the public that may watch this, that when you run for council, you need to know all of those ins and outs ahead of time. You need to be prepared to and want to learn about them, but you absolutely are not expected to know. There's probably more than 100 pieces of legislation that affect municipal administration and municipal government. And nor do I know all of those 100 pieces of legislation. I wouldn't expect a member of council on a part-time basis to know all that either. You need to be prepared to do your homework, to do your own research on issues as they come up, but it shouldn't be something that is so daunting that, you know, or that people don't decide to run because it's, oh my goodness, I don't know anything about municipal drainage, or I don't know anything about those animal control legislations, or whatever the case may be. You need to rely on the resources that are available for you to do your job. And then compensation should be according to that as well, recognizing it's a part-time job. Compensation needs to be a part-time job, but also recognize that there are definitely changes over the last 20 years, as Susan had mentioned. And, you know, the way we handle things is significant. I mean, I've been in this business for more than 30 years as well. I mean, we didn't operate with computers when I first started. Everything was done. And when we got a letter in from a constituent or from an organization, we got the handwritten letter. We spent a day or two thinking about our response, and we sent it back. And it might be 2 weeks before that constituent received that response, and they were happy with that. Now, I can tell you, members of council as well as staff are expected to respond back within hours in most instances, whether it happens to be through the week or on the weekend, because everything is, you know, the time is as of right. I mean, and with all of the electronics and technology, people expect those answers instantaneously. It's just the society as a whole. And it can be daunting. But I think that, you know, a couple of days, if you rely on the resources you have, and if you are concerned about learning as you go along, I think, you know, the agenda prep time is probably sufficient, or we would have heard about it long before now from more than one member of council. And there are lots of things that staff recommendation or a report will come forward to a council floor, and they will say, you know what, we need some more time to digest this. We're going to defer for a couple more weeks. Let us do some more time. Let us take some time to do some more research, to have some more discussions with our members of our constituents, with our ratepayers, with staff, whichever the case may be. So, you know, I think that they're in good hands. And I think that we have a very active public, which is great, to be able to help to provide some of that direction to them on that side of things, from the community wants and desires, as well as the staff information that's provided too.
Thank you. Yes, it is. Any other comments or questions about the councillor responses, or general amount of work that is required and so forth? No, that is again, I appreciate you getting that information for us, and I do appreciate all of the councillors taking the time. Again, speaking of the time that is required, they have taken the time to do this survey for us, and I do appreciate that, because I think it helps us sort of put in context exactly what they're dealing with, and we also have some good comments there from that. So I think that really helps. If there aren't any other comments on that survey, the next item on the agenda is the next committee meeting. So it is tentatively scheduled for August 11, which is another Tuesday, I believe. It's Tuesday at 10 a.m. How is that looking for everyone?
I'm
I'm
good.
okay with it.
Martin?
Yeah, fine with me. Yeah, fine with me.
And Michelle, is that
Yeah, that's no problem for staff.
Right?
okay? So can we go ahead and schedule that August 11 at 10 a.m.? Any
So-
other?
Still online?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Would it be on-
Yes, it will be the same format as we are right now. We still haven't made the switch to in-person meetings yet.
Okay,
I don't believe we're going to be doing that until September.
Okay.
So for the month of August, we'll still be continuing to meet virtually.
Great. And is there, I guess, I believe we've talked about this earlier too, as far as our timeline. I think you had mentioned at one point that perhaps if things go well, a report in the fall at some point. Is that the expectation, or?
It's hoped from staff's perspective anyways, that there could be a final report delivered early this fall, so that we could look at, if council agrees with the recommendation and there are any changes, that we could look at incorporating that into the draft budget.
Right.
The budget document will be presented to council probably in, I'm going to say late October. Sorry. Late October or early November. So in order to allow this committee to wrap up and make a presentation to council for council to look at adopting any recommendations that might come forward, it would be beneficial if this group could report at least before the end of September. But if that isn't an option, like, I don't want to rush the committee either. You have a job to do, and we want to make sure you're comfortable and that you have all of the resources available for you, have all the necessary discussions. But if it's possible before the end of September, that would be great.
Richard?
yeah, Michelle, a package was prepared at one time with recommendations, correct? For the counselors. Maybe you could explain that, because what I'm thinking, once again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there's already been something that's been prepared that we could start reviewing in detail, maybe it'll give us the opportunity to move ahead just that much quicker.
If I may, Madam Chair, through you, there was a report that was presented to council. I believe it was in late 2019, mid 2019, and the dates could be off, but council had asked the staff to prepare a report and to outline what the implications would be for budget purposes if they were to look at adjusting the base compensation to deal with the the removal of the 1/3 tax-free allowance. So that has been completed, and that's something that I've actually already indicated I will be sending out to this group after this meeting is completed. And there were some recommendations in that. So one was to adjust the base compensation. Staff also suggested to the council that there should be a cost of living increase on their base compensation on an annual basis. And what is currently proposed in the council bylaw is that be consistent with the percentage wage increase that staff obtain each year. So if there's a 1.5% salary increase for staff, then that same 1.5% salary increase for council members would continue to apply, so that you wouldn't freeze council wages, but there would see small increases all the way along and enable things to not fall as far behind as what they have, because we've had several years where there's been a wage freeze. So those types of recommendations and suggestions have been put forward, and you'll see that in the staff report that I send out to you after this meeting. But in terms of a specific base amount, staff have not recommended increasing the base amount anything more than simply dealing with the 1/3 tax-free allowance. Now, what I could also do, there has been some question along the way, is if council hadn't froze its wages for the last 8 or 9 years, what would the base compensation have been? As well, what would the amount be if we were to roll back in the 1/3 tax-free allowance? So I can give you some calculations along that regard, if that's something that the committee is interested in seeing. And essentially, if there hadn't been the wage freeze for the last 8 or 9 years, that's where the wage would have been. And again, if the tax-free allowance hadn't been removed, or the net pay, I guess, essentially. So we can do a couple of those calculations if that's something that would interest the committee, to give you a little bit more of a baseline. But again, I'm not trying to make work for staff either. If that's not something that you're interested in seeing, you know, we won't proceed down that road. I'm looking for some direction from the group as to what types of examples or what types of scenarios or calculations would be beneficial for you.
I personally would like to see the numbers, because I think it would give us some sort of direction.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, because it's also pre-COVID. and just see what they were speculating back at that time.
Yes.
And see how much has changed to today.
Martin, does that sound all right to you?
Yes, I think if we had those numbers, then we'd have a baseline of, you know, where we should have been today, where we should have been by 2019, and then we flip the tax calculation. We can look at that as well at that point. But if we've got those separated out and we've got some information, I think that's going to get us to a good jumping off point.
Yeah,
And it may be, through you, Madam Chair, it may be that once you have that, you'll see that the compensation might not be far off of the comparator municipalities if all of those regular increases had occurred. Because again, my understanding is those regular increases occurred with those, have occurred with those other municipalities. So, you know, I think one of the big detriments so far was that there was the wage freeze. And, you know, I know that the members of council of the day did it with all the best intentions, but I think that they actually harmed themselves in the process. And if it had happened for 1 year or maybe even 2, it wouldn't have been as significant. But you probably are going to see that it's fairly substantial after almost 10-year time frame. It adds up. Or in this case, doesn't add up.
So yes, Martin.
There's no, we're not doing any retroactive pay though, I take it, are we?
Again, that's entirely up to this committee to make recommendations or not. So.
All right, thanks.
Hadn't even thought about that.
The challenge with a retroactive pay, if you were to look at compensating other members of council that are already off council now, that would pose some challenges. If you're looking for a suggestion or recommendation from staff, is that you establish a new base pay and we move forward from there.
Well, at some point, yeah.
I would think, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. No,
Because again, those members of council at that time chose that compensation and to freeze that for those reasons. And they weren't looking to be compensated for those years. It just may be now it's fallen so far behind, you may want to consider what a new base rate might be had those regular increases have occurred.
Sure. No, that sounds good. If that can be prepared, again, keeping in mind that I don't want to see this as onerous for staff, because I know there's a lot of other things going on too. But I understand that some of those calculations were already done, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. No, if we could get that information, that would be great. Any other comments or questions before we can, I think we can adjourn if there is nothing else to discuss at this time, and meet again on August 11th. Is that okay? I will need.
Hopefully we got technology working by then properly. Eh?
We're
getting close.
Yeah. Okay, I will need someone to move that we adjourn.
So
I move that we adjourn.
And a seconder is
Awesome.
Martin.
Yes.
Richard moves and Martin second. Everyone in favor? Kevin, Martin, Richard, and myself. I guess we had a show of hands there. So motion is carried and we have adjourned our meeting.
Excellent. We'll see everybody back on August the 11th. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.